Hey. Hey. You with me? Gordy's gone, man. I'll be outside. And good luck. JDs and Lettlemen, welcome back to 110 SAS Actual. Today, we're going to talk about the story of a quick snatch and grab mission that started out perfect, but in just a moment went horribly wrong. A story of unprecedented and epic heroism of our American forces in Mogadishu just ridding the world of evil, and one particular Delta operator that selflessly traded his life for the safety of another. 31 years ago today, call sign IRENE was heard, and that was the last military mission for 18 U.S. service members. Gentlemen, today I'm going to tell you the story of Blackhawk down and Sergeant First Class Shugart, his absolute selflessness, and also the rifle that he carried that we have a clone here today of, the M14. First things first, I want to thank you guys for tuning in here today. I've set up a fund here at the bottom, charity for KIA and wounded military members in the line of duty. Donate $1 if you can. It's an absolutely fantastic cause. Also, all proceeds from this video and YouTube ad revenue will go to the same charity at the end of the month. So let's blow this thing up. Let's get to 1 million views and let's make this donation absolutely huge. Now, let's begin. So the year is 1993. UN peacekeeping forces had been in country in Somalia, helping keep control and alleviate the growing tensions in the Somalian civil war. The country itself was in shambles. Poverty-stricken citizens caught up in a civil war, leaving waste to small towns and villages across the country. A country already lacking in any real government system, any infrastructure, nor police force. And it was increasingly becoming a more and more dangerous and lawless place, along with a crumbling economy. Power didn't come from keeping the peace. Power came from chaos, and the main aggressor, leader of the SNA, the Somali National Allegiance, General Mohammed Farah Aidid. He was the person behind so much of this madness, murdering innocents, entire tribes and villages of people who stood in his way, stealing food and essential resources from small farming villages across the country just to fuel his war effort and causing widespread famine across the country. With complete control of the country's food supplies, he had the citizens pretty much at his will. The UN peacekeepers came in to assist the population and distribute water, medical supplies, and food, things like that. Unfortunately, the rules of engagement, well, they were rather strict, and many of those shipments and deliveries of these supplies that were needed by the population were pretty much immediately seized by Aidid shortly after the UN forces left the area, and inadvertently giving the SNA even more power across the region. In mid-1993, so Delta operators start to show up there and performing small little missions, okay? They had raided the Abdi house in Mogadishu looking for Aidid. Unfortunately, Aidid wasn't there. However, many of his elders and important members of Aidid's clan were there, and we've rolled them up. This news, it spread fast, and in turn created a sort of insurgency against American presence over there. So Bill Clinton then released codename Task Force Ranger into the country with one primary objective: find, capture, or neutralize General Mohammed Aidid. Task Force Ranger was led by JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command, and consisted of 441 troops, 8 Blackhawks, 4 Little Birds, 4 Little Bird attack helicopters, Humvees, 5-ton trucks, and so on and so forth. Now the troops, mostly made up of 75th Ranger Battalion and C Squadron of Delta Force. Also, the 160th Night Stalkers were there, with some other various support units. So, with this new U.S. military presence, Adid, he had gone into hiding and rarely showed his face in public after that, making the mission at hand even more difficult. So, Task Force Ranger had performed various other small missions, various raids across Somalia from August to September 1993, leading up to the events on October 3rd, eliminating crucial leaders of Adid's clan and getting closer and closer to finding him, while also creating relationships with informants amongst the native Somalians that assisted in the hunt. So on October 3rd, 1:50 p.m., it was made aware through their network of informants that the foreign minister of Somalia and a crucial player in the Adid regime, Omar Salad, was located in the residence in the Black Sea area. That's a town right in Mogadishu. Quick mission planning and a rundown of the play to snatch and grab immediately takes place within Task Force Ranger. Now, all of the other snatch and grabs and missions executed by Delta Force, it had been done with precision and very little resistance, very little hiccups. So when October 3rd came, it was business as usual for Task Force Ranger. Helo insertion, grab the targets, extract by helo and convoy, and then bounce. During the time leading up to October 3rd, General Garrison had requested some AC-130 gunships and armored vehicles as support units for their ground troops there. Everyone knew there was kind of this tension just building and the potential for an overwhelming force that could show up at any given day on any given operation and potentially grossly outnumber Task Force Ranger. However, this request, it was denied, citing rules of engagement and potential unnecessary civilian casualties that could come along with something like a support element of an AC-130. Even 2 weeks before the battle, General of the 10th Mountain Division in country, Major General David Meade, had assessed the situation in just days after his arrival in Somalia. It's now a declassified secret memo to the Army Chief of Staff, and I quote, "You're likely to have a big firefight with considerable casualties, and in the end, you're going to have to turn the city over to the Somalis." He'd only been in country for 2 days at this time. He writes, "We have a war going on in Somalia. From a tactical and maybe operational perspective, it's not going well. Mogadishu is not under our control and is full of danger. The trend lines, they're going in the wrong direction, and U.S. forces security, they are threatened." That was just a few weeks before October 3rd. So, guys, if we take a step back here and look at the situation, something bad was bound to happen. There's a serious tension. Enemy forces, they're reacting to our raids, to our missions much faster, and we're taking contact much faster. We have a lack of any real air support or armor assets. In the Civil War, Adid was winning. He's creating new fighters on the daily, and soon to be a relatively complex operation with a lot of moving parts in a highly populated, dangerous city performed by our guys. So, the day of October 3rd, 1993, at 1:50 p.m., informants had advised Adid's top 2 lieutenants were meeting in a building on Haldewig Avenue, just 1 block over from the Olympic Hotel, near the Bakara Market. This place, guys, it was a breeding ground for SNA forces in a heavily populated area. Despite it being danger close in proximity to a huge number of SNA forces, the mission was still on. On paper, the mission was simple. It was nothing like they hadn't done before. Snatch and grab. 16 Delta operators would touch down next to the building, assault the target, while 30 more operators were dropped to pull security outside and assist on the operation. Rangers would be deployed by Blackbird, form an outside perimeter, and Danny McKnight's column would be there to extract the prisoners and any wounded. Delta Force snipers Randy Shugart, Gary Gordon, and Brad Holling would be on overwatch from a Blackhawk Super 6.2. So it's an expected 30-minute operation, what was supposed to be less than a 10-minute drive back to the base for the mechanized unit. Expecting a 30-minute op, troops simply did not prepare for the ensuing 18-hour battle. Light and fast takedown of the target, then extraction. Extra ammo, extra water, other mission essential items like night vision goggles and body armor, they were just left at the base. It was even said by command that we were supposed to be catching them off guard by conducting a broad daylight, daytime operation in a heavily populated area and utilizing air and ground assets. they wouldn't have any time to form any serious reaction force. That's a real thing. So at 3:32 p.m., October 3rd, call sign IRENE is given, and the U.S. Task Force Ranger is given the go-ahead. Just 10 minutes later, Delta operators arrive on point and assault the objective.
Move out the AO now, make a left towards the east, and then head north towards the smoke. I think I have ID the smoke, over. Roger, try to consolidate here. From there, we will try to get you out. M14 is going to double up to the second strike site. Roger, I do have Tigerese. Give location, over. You're saying 6-4, over at 6-4. Somalia, second ground forces. That is sorry.
5 minutes later, 4 more Blackhawks insert 64 Rangers to provide a perimeter around the objective and pull security. It's at this time did Ranger Chalk 4 begin receiving small arms fire. Then an RPG explodes near that Blackhawk. Making executive calls, Sergeant Matt Eversman had his Ranger Chalk insert about a block far north of the objective to avoid any more incoming fire. It was at this time that Private First Class Blackburn misses his fast rope and falls 70 feet to the ground. This was abnormal to receive any incoming fire this early in the missions. So this is new, but it's nothing that they can't handle. Now, McKnight's ground convoy arrives at the objective and orders Blackburn to be evac to the base, a drive that should be approximately 5 minutes. So Blackburn was evacuated via cargo Humvee, escorted by 2 Humvees with 50 cal machine guns, and fought through multiple engagements on the RTB, even losing a Sergeant Dominic Pila during the gunfire. By this time, large crowds of Somalians were converging on the area, and even a 5-ton truck was disabled by an RPG. Small arms fire began to erupt around the surrounding area, so we're starting to see a lot of chaos at this point. At 4:02 p.m., just 20 minutes after the Delta operators touched down, they had the clan leaders and 21 other prisoners in custody and starting to get loaded into McKnight's column. A massive gunfight at this point is just erupting. Chaos and confusion of war, it starts to take its toll. Chalk 4 had taken 3 more casualties at this point, so that makes it 1 KIA and 4 wounded just 20 minutes into the op. McKnight's convoy was delayed in leaving that target as well. There was a major confusion on who's supposed to be giving the signal to start loading these trucks and just get the heck out of there and evacuate. It's a major miscommunication between Delta and McKnight's column. Casualties began to amass, but the operation from this point, it was going as planned until 4:20. Blackhawk helicopter Super 6-1 is hit by an RPG. It crashes about 300 yards from the target. This is right around the time just the whole op starts to go south very fast. On board are Delta Force snipers providing overwatch Daniel Bush and Jim Smith. They do survive the crash and immediately begin defending their position and for their lives. The Humvee convoy begins to leave the objective, and they say, hey, you need to meet at the crash site. Meanwhile, Ranger Chalk, led by D. Tommaso on foot, make their way to Super 6-1 crash site. At 4:28, Super 6-8 inserts a search and rescue team to the crash site where they find both pilots unfortunately passed away and 2 of the crew chiefs severely wounded. D. Tommaso's Ranger Chalk is now pulling security. They do have this a little bit under control, so they formed a perimeter to allow the survivors to be evacuated. Now, during this time, Super 6-8 took a hit from an RPG and was ordered RTB to avoid going down in the city. It barely limped its way back there. Now, only one of the pilots that passed away could be removed at that time in Super 6-1 because the other one was buried under the wreckage and they needed extra equipment. During this time, Delta operators from the point of objective began to move to the first crash site on foot, while the convoy was headed there as well. The crash was about 4 blocks from Danny McKnight, and they had not seen the exact spot where Super 6-1 had landed and relied strictly on a P-3 Orion surveillance aircraft to direct them to that site. During this time, due to just the chaos of war, the fog and the dust of that city, every intersection being an LDA and just an absolute crossfire, delayed directions from the surveillance aircraft, where seconds counted, made a tremendous problem for Danny McKnight's column. Not to mention, roadblocks were being set up by the SNA forces, and eventually they took a wrong turn and they got lost in the city, taking heavy casualties in the process. It's only 20 minutes after the first Blackhawk goes down, and less than an hour into the op, at 4:40, did a third helicopter get hit by an RPG. Super 6-4, which was on Overwatch, pilot Mike Durant tried to fly the bird as far out of the combat zone as possible. However, it just couldn't hold up. It went down about a half-mile south of the crash site number 1. So at this point, we have multiple KIA, over 10 wounded. 2 Blackhawks crashed and on the ground. In our forces, they're spread thin or they're lost in the city under heavy hostile fire. With a semi-stable perimeter around the crash site of Super 6-1 and getting those wounded evacuated, McKnight's column, who was lost at that time trying to get to crash site 1, were ordered to go to crash site 2 at Super 6-4. However, they would not reach the site. Absolute chaos, again, of war and just mounting casualties had not helped. Over half of their force were either dead or wounded with barely running vehicles. They had to RTB as they were becoming ineffective and more of a liability than they were helping. So now it's 4:42, just 2 minutes after Super 6-4 was downed. It was Delta operators Gary Gordon and Randy Shugart. They were inserted to create some sort of perimeter and kind of establish some sort of security there. Their initial request to be inserted to help form a perimeter had been denied. They said, hey, let us in there, let us see if our guys are okay, we're gonna form some sort of security and form a perimeter. No. However, they persisted. Now, on board that Blackhawk, which the Delta snipers were on, Gordon and Shughart, was a not-so-known name, a third Delta sniper teammate, Brad Halling. They were all 3 providing sniper overwatch that day when Super 6-4 went down. They were the first there providing sniper support for that downed crew. Now, on Super 6-4, there were actually 5 members aboard: Mike Durant, Raymond Frank, William Cleveland, Thomas Field, and Wynn Marone. The movie, I feel, doesn't really portray this particular event very well at all. So I'm going to give you guys my very best interpretation of the hours of research and reading I have done and compiled here. During Overwatch from the 3 Delta snipers of the second crash site, we knew there was more than just one person alive. In fact, evidence kind of proves that there was a small sort of perimeter formed around the site by the surviving members defending with small arm fire. During the sniper's overwatch, a crew member manning the minigun on the Blackhawk Super 6-2 that carried Gordon and Shugart and Halling was wounded. So this Blackhawk is up there, and unfortunately, there's nobody to man the gun. So what does Halling do? He took the initiative and goes and mans the gun. This is why we only see 2 of the Delta snipers inserted that day, Gordon and Shughart. They requested to be inserted and set a perimeter and potentially evacuate all casualties while Super 6-2 stayed online with the 3rd Delta sniper and that minigun as air support from above. That's a serious force multiplier. However, almost immediately after insertion, Super 6-2 was hit by an RPG and had to RTB immediately. This left Super 6-4 and all of its crew and Delta operators Gary Gordon and Shughart all alone by themselves to defend this crash site.
When Super 6-2 was hit by an RPG, Brad Halling was seriously wounded. He actually ended up losing his leg. He obviously did survive the conflict, however, it took him out of the fight and took the bird completely out of the fight.
So we have a really bad situation here. McKnight's column, they can't get to him. There's even been a QRF that tried to get to him. They can't get to him either. It's starting to get bad. So upon arrival, Gordy and Shugart, the other crew members were in worse shape than Durant. From this point on, we really only have Mike Durant's own words as he was the sole survivor of that event. So I'll read you his words. When we hit, I had broken my femur and crushed some vertebrae in my spine. I just couldn't move. I had my personal weapon in the cockpit with me, reached down and decided, hey, I was going to fight it out right here, right now. And it wasn't long after that that Gary, Gordy, and Shugart show up. It was this surreal feeling, he says. I mean, it was this awful situation that you're in, and suddenly it's all over. The most calm and collected individuals I have ever met. Like business as usual, and no real grave danger here. I mean, these are two soldiers from your element. Surely they're part of the rescue squad, and now they're gonna load us up and get us out of here, not knowing they were the only two soldiers on the ground besides our crew. So they got me out of the aircraft and laid me on the ground, slapped my MP5 on my chest, and said, go to work. The way I described their actions were professional and so deliberate to the point that they looked like they were planning a parking lot. I mean, they didn't seem alarmed by the situation that they were in, just focused on the task at hand and how to improve our situation. It was just a few moments later after this that I hear Gary Gordon say, damn, I'm hit. And what always struck me was the way he said it. I mean, it was as if he nicked himself with a knife. Ah, I'm hit. Just very matter of fact. Apparently, it was a mortal wound, as Randy Shugart came around the corner not long after and gave me Gordy's gun, telling me, Gordy's gone, I'll be outside, and good luck. Now the only two soldiers I've seen, one is down, and now I'm out of ammo, and Somalians appear to be getting more aggressive. Randy then comes back around to the aircraft. He makes a single radio call for a status update and says, they're coming soon, and then heads back to the other side of the aircraft nose. I never seen him again. Man. That's heavy. I think as a man, it's only natural to think of such a way to go as those two operators did. Man, I mean, it's just awful. Like, it's terrible, but there's just this feeling of dying as a warrior, a true last stand, fighting until the very last breath, the final second for a brother in arms. When the good Lord comes knocking and says, your time is up, right here, right now, well, I'd like to think they wouldn't have had it any other way in that moment, together with your brother in arms. A true heroic warrior's death to the last breath. And to all 18 men who lost their lives that day, rest easy. So gentlemen, that concludes the story of Randy Shugart. We can now talk about his rifle and what we have here today. So, we know Shugart, he carried an M14 rifle. We all know that. But how was it set up? Well, for the time, I'm not gonna lie, it was kind of a high-speed weapon, really. An M14 battle rifle, it was nothing to swing around when you're talking about the military's most elite Delta Force. We don't exactly know why he chose an M14 that day, but we can only assume. I mean, if we think about it, it's a 7.62 cartridge, it's a 20-round mag, it's semi-auto, it's honestly, it's kind of ideal for the sniper Overwatch mission role that he had. His mission really wasn't to be boots on the ground, so an M14 really wouldn't be a terrible choice for that op. However, we know how it ended up, on the ground, and he risked his life for another person. And from this point on, his rifle unfortunately was never recovered, so we don't actually truly know exactly how his gun was set up. And there's no real photos floating around with him holding it, so we can't really say. However, what we do know is what people have said and roughly how it was set up based on how other operators set their M14s and M4s up during the time. It was only just a few years before that red dot optics were really becoming a thing. Aimpoint, they were pretty much at the forefront in the cutting edge of this technology. We absolutely know that the unit had Aimpoint 3000 optics at that time and also Aimpoint 5000 optics. The Aimpoint 3000s had come out just a few years before the 5000, so the odds are greater that there were more Aimpoint 3000 optics in use by Delta. However, these guys really had their own preference to exactly how they set their weapons up, especially when it came to snipers, kind of just in their own class, and especially in the 90s. So it's generally accepted that the Aimpoint 3000 is probably most clone correct. However, the Aimpoint 5000 was definitely used as well and in that same time frame. So both would technically be considered correct. More likely the Aimpoint 3000, however, you kind of have your choice of what's available. So both can technically be correct. I went with the aimpoint 5000 on this. It's just a little bigger field of view. It's a 1-inch tube here, I think, versus 30 millimeters. So the aimpoint 5000 makes for a little bit more useful optic. Now, we know he didn't use a can on his gun like Gordy did. The M14, it was a very difficult weapon to reliably suppress, and suppressor technology in the military at that time, it was very much in its infant state. So there's reports and pictures of laser aiming modules on weapons during that time on Delta operator guns. That's right, essentially very primitive PEC 15s. These were designed to use with night vision goggles. I didn't pick one up for the video, and there's a reason why, because there's no real way to tell if he did or if he didn't have one. And they were used in very, very small numbers. However, they were definitely in use, so it's very possible. There's only one real potential proof, and it's a painting that you see here. But even that was done after the fact, and it was done as more of a memorial to those two heroes. So how it's mounted, this is the thing. How it's mounted is kind of hilarious, really. And being on an M14, I couldn't imagine it being very useful at all. Basically, you had two options. You clamp it to the barrel, or you clamp it to the gas tube, or you could even screw it right into the stock. Now, here's the thing. I would imagine a U.S. Army Delta sniper would find passive aiming behind the aimpoint optic would be far more useful than a primitive IR laser that was just brand new technology that I can pretty much guarantee didn't hold zero for very long, being the way that it was mounted, either from recoil or having it bumped off the side of the helicopter, or paired with, of course, a totally rigged mounting system. I mean, who knows? But I would imagine a Delta sniper would probably find something like that a major liability, just because, yeah, it's zeroed at one point, but maybe in 2 minutes it's not. Not to mention, this was a daytime op that was supposed to be a 30-minute ordeal. Even some Delta guys, they left their nods back at base. Now, so I don't know. It's the reason I left it out. I just don't see any strong evidence as to why it should be on here. So now the M14, it was the only real semi-automatic 7.62 in the arsenal of the US military at that time. Now, it had been in use for quite a few decades before that. And one thing we learned was in the jungles of Vietnam, it's a terrible choice for the weapon. And guess what? In the desert, it posed the same issues. Wood would swell in moisture, in high moisture areas. Guess what it does in dry areas? It shrinks. And that causes serious point of impact issues. And a Delta sniper is going to know that. And it would be safe to assume that it's a US GI fiberglass stock that's bedded to the action. We knew a great deal about M14s back then. I'd say amongst the military, far more than we know today. And as they sit in the armory, kind of just rotting away. Accurizing the M14 to be a sub-MOA platform back then wasn't necessarily unheard of. And it's much more difficult to do today than it was back then because, let's be real, M14 Smiths, they were alive. They were alive and well, and they were thriving. But today, well, unfortunately, most of them have either retired or passed away. Places like Fulton Armory keep the legacy rolling on and do a very, very good job at it. They have M14s ready to go on the shelf, as accurate as a lot of battle rifles today. Now, his gun was painted. We do know that. We don't know the exact paint scheme because, again, there's no pictures, but we can assume, based on other Delta operators who did survive and had their guns painted, they kept it pretty simple. Light brown and dark brown. Don't think it got much more extravagant than that. So here's the thing. For the role he was tasked with, I think it was an excellent choice, really, especially with the tools that they had at that time. The problem is just with the whole op and how he was employed. There was no real SOP for getting their helos out of RPG and other small arms firing range after insertion of these units, and even less protection to their assets in the sky, thus leading to easy targets of down. 4 Blackhawks were hit that day, and in a matter of less than 2 hours at that. That's a considerable loss, even worse considering how small the op was compared to the scale of operations that were happening daily in Afghanistan and Iraq. But Delta snipers were tasked with overwatch as a force multiplier, and that's exactly what they did. And multiple birds that day got hit, one of which that went down that day in the city carried Delta snipers. I would have to say we have learned a lot from that op, and SOPs have definitely changed thereafter. So, gentlemen, we have a wrap on the Blackhawk Down incident and the Delta operator legend Randy Shugart. I thank you guys so much for sticking around to hear this story. I don't know why I find this story so important to share. I mean, it's not my place to really do it, but if I can do something to help preserve the legacy of these folks, man, I'm going to do it. I did quite a bit of reading and a lot of research into this, so let's blow this thing up to 1 million views and let's raise a ton of money for charity. And to all 18 men who lost their lives that day and the dozens and dozens more wounded, may you rest in peace, heroes.